morning, everyone, and thank you for being here for the second workshop in our series on native and invasive plant species. On behalf of the Sharon Energy and Environment Commission, the Sharon Land Trust, the Salisbury Association Land Trust, the Sharon Conservation Commission, and the Sharon Audubon Center, I'm pleased to welcome you back. My name is Carolyn Clocker, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sharon Land Trust. In our first session, we focused on understanding the roles that both native and invasive plants play in our landscapes. Today, we're turning our attention to the practical side of that conversation, how to manage invasive species effectively and responsibly. At the heart of our mission and the mission of all the organizations partnering on this event is a shared commitment to conserving our natural resources for future generations. But conservation is not just about protecting land, it's about caring for it over time. Stewardship is an ongoing responsibility, and invasive species are one of the most persistent challenges we face in that work. Across our preserves, invasive species are constantly reshaping the landscape, often outcompeting native species, reducing biodiversity, and negatively impacting native plant and animal communities. Addressing that challenges takes time, knowledge, and sustained effort. Today's workshop is designed to build on that kind of work by offering practical, science-based strategies that landowners and professionals can use on their properties. Whether you are managing a small yard or a large piece of land, the goal is to help you make informed decisions about what approaches are most appropriate, when to use them, and what to expect over time. So thank you for being here, for your interest, and for being part of this ongoing effort. If you find today's session helpful, I encourage you to join us for the final workshop in the series, which will focus on how to support native plants and build healthier, more resilient landscapes. Before I introduce our presenters and we get on, I just want to remind folks who are new, or let folks know who are new to this space, where the exits are. There are two large exits in the back, plus the door that you came in. There are bathrooms located in a hallway to your right if you exit the door you came in. And please make sure you silence your cell phone so we don't interrupt today's program. All right, so with that, I'm pleased to introduce our presenters for today's programs. So Mike Nadeau has been involved in land care and the tree business for more than 50 years. He co-owned a 100% organic land care company and is a founding member of the Organic Land Care Program, a sister organization of the Connecticut chapter of NOFA, which I forgot.
Northeast Organic Farming Association.
Thank you. Mike was also one of the original authors of the Standards for Organic Land Care, and helped develop the intensive training program that has graduated more than 4,000 accredited organic land care practitioners across the U.S. and Canada. Today, Mike works as a consultant, helping landowners return their properties to ecological integrity through invasive plant control, wildflower meadows, and native plantings. His work is grounded in decades of experience and a deep understanding of how landscapes function. He is joined today by Tom Zetterstrom, a Canaan native, conservationist, tree preservationist, and fine art photographer. Tom has long been involved in environmental advocacy and has spent more than a decade leading invasive species management efforts across Northwest Connecticut. His work has included projects at Washenee Park, Housatonic Valley Regional High School, and the Housatonic Knotweed Control Initiative, and he has been instrumental in advancing invasive plant management efforts with the Sharon Land Trust. In recognition for his contributions, Tom received the Leslie Meerhoff Award from University of Connecticut's Invasive Plant Working Group in 2024. So we're very glad to have both of them with us today. So please join me in welcoming Mike Nadeau and Tom Zetterstrom, and Tom is going to be kicking off.
This is a well-timed event, by the way. Next week is National Invasive Species Awareness Week. So Sharon is fully in sync with what's happening on a national scale. And it's wonderful to see 6 community organizations supporting this endeavor today, and this is the second in a series of 3 talks. Mike will give the 3rd talk on March 24th or something. At any rate, here we are at the Sharon Town Hall. Behind you and on the wall, the mural shows your historic architecture and a landscape from the pre-invasive era. We're in the invasive era. Okay, we've reviewed what's going to happen today, strategies, and how homeowners can make informed decisions tackling invasive plants on their property. thanks to the Connecticut Conservation District, we've got free brochures in the back for you, which include 26 plants. I'm going to speak about 4 plants today. They are Oriental Bittersweet, Common Buckthorn, Garlic Mustard, and Mugwort. Oriental Bittersweet, the source of our Christmas wreaths of Christmases past. Oriental Bittersweet, the ghosts of Christmases past. It happens to be in Falls Village. Falls Village, every tree in this photograph will be enveloped and snagged and dead within 10 to 15 years, as happened at the Hamlin Preserve, where 160 mature 80-year-old red cedars were enveloped, snagged, collapsed, and laid horizontal. With Tim Hunter, Roger and I went in there in October of 22, and we barely could access the density of collapsed invasive plants. Previously, the forest report from David Beers indicated impenetrable due to a tangle of vines and thorns. Too far gone to bother, was his conclusion. Problem with that is it's still active in producing seeds, so it would only expand. So we were confronted with a massive invasive impact. And our strategy, our plans today are to talk about strategies to counteract it. Integrated pest management involves a series of considerations. Is that working? Oh, barely illuminating. Scouting. You all have property, get to know it. Identification. You have the booklet now. Bring it with you. Identify those plants. And then, let's see, I got it in one of these pockets. Flagging. We have a roll of tape in the back, and Carolyn will dispense 10-foot lengths for you. So if you don't have the tools with you, you can at least signal for a future visit, this plant needs your attention. Assessment, try to think about, okay, what's the patch size? What are the priority plants for controlling? And maybe mapping is part of that process. Implementation, then you decide whether you're going to go out there with a lopper, hire Mike, get an assessment, or pull out a buckthorn blaster. Did you bring it? Thanks. Another decision-making tool is to think of these things seasonally. This is from the University of Minnesota. In the winter, they're suggesting, as an example, cut and treat bittersweet or buckthorn. In the summer, spring rather, something we're going to be doing, treat or pull garlic mustard before flowers and seeds form. Critical timing needs to occur in April, and really ideally by the middle of May, not later than Memorial Day. In summer, all herbaceous plants are in full blossom, and there are many options to deal with. Their fall example is map and treat bittersweet and knotweed. Good timing. Fall is the optimal period of time for the translocation of the chemistry into the roots. Kill the roots is one of our main themes. Mapping. This is very simple. This is an early project for Salisbury Park and Forest. Scoville Sanctuary, an extraordinary landscape, limestone outcrop. There we saw bittersweet seedlings, ground level bittersweet, tall vines rising 96 feet, and then barberry. Peter Kent and Roger Liddell was with us on that. In 3 minutes, picked 12 bittersweet seedling vines, and in that period of time prevented the future, which would be about now, 10 years later, entanglement of those trees in those vines. So early detection and rapid response is demonstrated here. I'm pulling out a vine here, and I managed to tease out the whole root in its entirety, which is important. You don't want to pull up a plant and leave half the root behind. It will regenerate. From my casual comparison, those seedlings come up really nicely. At 2 years, 3 years, you start to lose some fragments. You might want to be carrying a trowel in your pocket to help tease that out. But especially in that period of first occurrence and introduction, that's where you can maintain the native plant balance. At Hamlin, we were at the maximum biological potential of Asiatic bittersweet. It was the almost exclusive, thoroughly dominant plant, and it had eliminated the natives. On the left, a vine which is going to be a little more challenging. It might come out because it's in a leaf pine needle litter, but my inclination is if I'm not getting it to yield, especially more easily done in the spring when the soils are wet, I'm going to pull out a lopper, a clipper, and a buckthorn blaster. And with a dab of herbicide, glyphosate concentrate, we typically use a fraction of a milliliter on a half-inch stem will kill the root. If you don't have the equipment with you or the inclination, you got your tape, you can mark that vine and think about it later, at least pay attention to it, and possibly at least try to pull it or cut it and prevent seed formation. As they get larger, they get taller. And you can do this, hey, winter is a good time for this, but in the fall you'll certainly notice the bittersweet is just bright orange at the top and a super high prolific seed production. By comparison, the vines on the left happen to be porcelainberry, which we're also dealing with at Hamlin, and we'll come back to that in terms of its characteristics. On the left, you see the determination of bittersweet counterclockwise, spiraling up the tree, and then getting up near the top, and then extending out a reach to the next tree. And by the time it gets up there, we're in sunlight, that's when it it knows, now I can really generate seeds. I don't have to worry about climbing anymore. I've made it to the top. The vine on the right is a native vine. Do not cut Virginia creeper. That is symbiotic in its relationship with our native forests. It stays on the interior of the crown. It doesn't envelop the crown. It has no negative impact and has high wildlife value. Roger holding a vine he cut a few years ago and then noticed, oh shucks, I didn't treat it. It's 5 vines. Martin Balthus cut this last early November, where we had worked our way around to where we initially introduced the management concept and the clipping by Hotchkiss students to a vine that had not been treated and produced 12 sprouts. Another one we missed where the Hotchkiss kids had worked, was well on its way to climbing up that tree. This one, about 3-4 inch diameter tree, vine, approximately 40 years old. Within months after it was cut, was already producing 20 vines. All right, I quote Mike, cut and treat, where herbicide concentrate is applied directly to freshly cut stems, uses a scant amount of herbicide translocated directly to root system, resulting in death. Practical benefit usually results in the least amount of disturbance of the ground, whereas extracted roots encourage the germination of weed seeds where the soils are disrupted and latent seeds can emerge. So, as Mike would do when he would be pulling out those plants, he would try to cover that over with a leaf foliage, and he will give more detail on that subject matter. So, in the Hamlin Preserve, there's the collapse section, and then we still have 325 remaining standing trees, but they got vines climbing up them. They just haven't succumbed to the plant. John Brett knows the procedure that we've worked out. Cut at shoulder height. Mike is dropping down to his knees, cutting at waist height, and converting those pieces of vine into fragments that just look like sticks. And then we have the vines hanging out there at eye level. We know that those vines are severed. We have a window in there, and then we have an opportunity to get underneath in that window, as Sophie Lake Genouve and Alan Reason are doing here, cutting and doing the herbicide application. Marie Marshall here, a very astute user of the buckthorn blaster. And does anybody recognize who else is in the picture with her? One of the volunteers, unnamed, but they all deserve credit, quite honestly. We developed an interesting strategy with Sharon Land Trust interns, which we have adopted in Canaan with Troop 22 Boy Scouts. Trail maintenance, North Greenway, they go in there with loppers. David Moran, scout leader, and I, or Christian Allen, Canaan resident, we follow. The scouts put in a flag where they cut a stem. We pull out the flag and treat the stem. So you can reduce your trail maintenance instead of every 3-year interval to every 10 years this way. You just improve your efficiency remarkably. In the literature at the back of the room is the Vermont Nature Conservancy Invasive Plant Management Chemical Fact Sheet. In it, it talks about becoming an informed applicator. It describes glyphosate and triclopyr. Those are the two chemistries that we typically use, and different methods of application, and then it gives you a list of invasive plants and best techniques for each. Okay, so we're talking about glyphosate. It's a major issue from a public health point of view, from environmental health issues, and Tony Peel, the beloved late Tony Peel, a board member of the WHO even, wrote, glyphosate is killing us all, but the following week he got a lot of reaction. And I have to always read this. To be perfectly clear, we are not talking about the careful and responsible, safe, and effective application of glyphosate by Tom Zetterstrom and others to fight invasive plants threatening our native species. He understood the balance of nature as a bird lover requires those native plants. We can't lose them and then expect to have birds. The toolkit is extremely simple. Where's that blaster, Mary? Can you hand it to me? Can you grab it for me? I need it. Okay, so listen, for $100 you can become equipped. There's the key tool, the 4-ounce bottle with the tip, the clipper, the gloves, glasses, and so forth. That's your protective equipment. And so what we do is we take glyphosate in the wetlands approved formulation, which is not Roundup. It doesn't have that surfactant. Don't need a surfactant. We use Market Blue, an indicator dye. We fill those up, and God, I can remember Todd Mervosh, he's not here today, but worked with him on a park in Salisbury, and with one 4-ounce container, he saved an acre of conservation, Civilian Conservation Commission, Civilian Conservation Corps conifers. One of the other tools we use is the Yukon Invasive Calendar that explains optimal times for various treatments. We also use that University of Minnesota calendar in the same way. You know, for buckthorn, it says, yeah, get that stuff in the spring, in the winter, and in the summer, but not in the spring. And then it says in the fall. That's actually the best time to do that methodology. Okay, so we've had students and volunteers in there. Because of the vast impact of bittersweet at Hamlin, we had to revert to heavy machinery, and half a dozen contractors. That's a forestry shredder or mower on a boom. All of those trees are enveloped, and these are the ones that the volunteers couldn't even access. Then we did a salvage harvest, Gary O'Kane with his tree harvester, Jesse Bunce helping with debris management and limbing up the cedar trees, and the Hansons, doing burn piles. We had so much biomass. Normally you would leave the remnants of the invasive plants right there. We do not remove them, we kill them. And you might shred them, but hey, quite honestly, after treating barberry a year or two later, I go into the forest, I just stomp on it and it just busts apart. And then Jason Bresson and Applewood Tree Care, after we saved birches, apple tree, elm tree, pruned, treated, and liberated them. And here's, we're back to porcelainberry. In here you see the vines that Martin Balthus cut, and they're dead. But the plant spreads pervasively over the landscape and just grows as a mat on the ground and produces seeds. So that is a use of broadcast herbicidal foliar application, in which case Christian Allen is using triclopyr, which is a selective herbicide, does not kill grass, only kills broadleaf plants, and is really a optimal treatment for these kinds of woody plants. Last March, 5 Houstonic Valley Regional High School seniors on their day of service went into Hamlin, and with their iPhones, one guy is photographing all bittersweet patches, one guy is photographing all white cedars, the other guy is photographing all white pines. And so we had been working around this area and controlling it in various ways, and along the edges we still had work to do. And it turns out we now knew we had 58 bittersweet locations, and now that 11 months later is down to about 18. So we're going to complete the task, bring us back down from that full biological potential to the early detection levels. That's a manageable and maintenance available approach. We still have 196 pines and 129 red cedars, so that's 329 trees. So we lost half that amount, 160 trees, to bittersweet. We've saved 2/3 of that grove. A major achievement. There's part of the salvage harvest pile of logs, and there's 2 piles there. And Tim Hunter is now using those logs for trail maintenance projects, which is fantastic. So we actually recovered, and quite honestly, somebody said to me, oh, you should have just chipped all that stuff up. You wouldn't have had all that debris. But you know, you don't chip up red cedars. These are 80 years to grow these poles. All right, look at this. Martin and Edmund Mandan got in there on that elm in 2022. Got the vines. This is early on. Thanks for the photograph. And then we worked around it further, and then Jason Bresson came in and injected it. So not only are we saving those conifers, but specimen trees. If this was on the Sharon Green, people would come from miles around to admire it and photograph it. An apple tree caught my eye in there when I was in there talking to Jason about the elm, and I said, Jesus, that looks like it's got some potential. So we got the high school Envirothon group over there with Dave Moran and Martin and Edmund and Roger Liddell. They cut and treated a bunch of privet. There were vines going up in that tree. So we dealt with the invasives, and now Hamlin boasts Connecticut's champion common apple tree. It's been properly pruned and cabled. We don't want to lose one of those leaders. then we'll lose our championship status. Okay, so it's guys like this and women, and Tim and Sophie and Martin and Alan and Nick Moore and Edmund and Mike Kelly. Hey, it's an enjoyable practice. We got a lot of invasive still to to deal with. You're welcome to join the effort, and Carolyn will give you a little description during our break. How is my time doing?
You're good. You still have 20 minutes.
Okay, we're going to move along pretty fast now. Hey, another item in the news. UConn has established its invasive plant management program. Improve your invasive plant identification and management skills. Costs $200, but is happy to know that Tim has signed up for that, and Sophie, and yeah, we gave a talk last summer, and I realized that there were a lot of people that signed up from that, including Becky Eaton. All right, that effort, Tim provided me with the background. This was as of last spring. 533 volunteer and staff hours went into that Hamlet project. We're probably up to 570 by now after last fall, in that vicinity. So, but yeah, shall we say, I don't think it could have been done without the volunteers. They really made it possible. Okay, that's chapter 1 on bittersweet. So I got 20 minutes to go. All right, we're going to do 3 more invasive plants. Buckthorn. Now that we've got a bittersweet under management, and when Sophie and I and Tim were in there at the end of the summer, okay, we started hitting some of the buckthorn. We hadn't done a little bit of attention to them later. But I don't want to think that, okay, we got all the bittersweet, we can go home now. The buckthorn is still there, and it's a particularly insidious tree. That's what it looks like in the winter. And back in a year ago, we were in there, Hotchkiss students, and Tim is demonstrating the cut and treat method. They're the Hotchkiss kids. We're using hand tools only. This is tough wood. It's hard work. And they're having fun trying to pull it out of the trees. It should be said, with vines, we never pull the vines out of the trees. With buckthorn, it's too complicated. They actually demonstrate vine-like habit and form. They don't put out a lot of diameter to support themselves. They lean into another tree as they're growing in. Or, as you saw in that first shot, more like a thicket. They're just kind of woven together as a basket. I gave a couple of talks at the University of Minnesota on American elm restoration in 2015. I went to one of the lectures. It was on buckthorn. I was introduced to the buckthorn blaster, so 11 years ago. And then I realized, hey, awakening. I have buckthorn on my property, right there on my fence row. This being the largest one, 14 inches in diameter. So I decided, okay, I'm going to clean up that whole fence row, cut all that, and notice the orange heartwood on those. Got them all chipped up. A couple years later, I decided to do on my neighbor's back field, which is abuts my woodlands. Here's 24 buckthorn plants. And then a few months later, I did about 20 more. And I basically eliminated 99% of buckthorn seed production on my property. And it's no longer an issue. These things went through a chipper. We treated each stem, but we only treat the sapwood, not the heartwood. There's only transmission of chemistry in that little band. Same here. And then here, notice, under a cedar, okay, we got buckthorn and buckthorn that were flown in. Those seeds were flown in by a bird, and they love to sit in a cedar tree or a conifer, especially because it's got protection. Voided the seed, it dropped right down, and hey, that was opportunistic. That buckthorn could just kind of grow in there against that, lean against that cedar, and allow the cedar to provide the structure for it. Okay, on my own property, I cut a buckthorn several years previously. Kind of, I'm not sure, uninformed, not sure of its identification, but then a few years later, that one stem became 5. So I had 5 stems to treat, similar here. In the literature from landscaperestoration.com, the inventors of the buckthorn blaster, they say, consider suspending cut stem treatment of buckthorn from spring thaw to full leaf out. So that's similar to bittersweet as a vine and to multiflora rose. Okay, 15 minutes ago, we're cranking. So that's part of the cycle of not doing it at the wrong time of the year. We have a little window coming up before that spring thaw, and we hope to have volunteers like Martin and Edmund and others of you in this room showing up in about 4 weeks. Okay, buckthorn produces these drupes, fruit, berries. That's what it looked like in summer. By fall, they're almost black, dark purple. Buckthorn is an allelopathic plant, which means that the plant exudes chemistry and that alters soils and favors its own kind, but inhibits the growth and establishment and germination of native plants. So I went to a talk at Great Mountain Forest a couple weeks ago and heard Dr. Eli Ward of the Connecticut Ag Experimental Station and asked her to explain to me the mechanism of allelopathic impact. Hey, I've been known of its existence, but I didn't know how it actually affected. So these fruits, when they drop to the ground, or the foliage, or the roots, put out exudates, chemicals that, of all things, diminish, interfere, and interrupt the interaction of mycorrhizae with the roots of native plants. 90% of native plants rely on that arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi mutualism to support absorption of nutrients and water. So this plant is engaging in chemical warfare at Hamlin Preserve, and if you got it, and it used to do that on my land, I'm happy to say, and is a consideration that we want to add to our understanding of what the potential is for leaving buckthorn in that setting of Hamlin. So I'm hoping, Tim, we can come up with a strategy on that. Okay, we're switching to garlic mustard. Hey, I picked it because it's also allelopathic. You may have noticed if you got this plant, it creates a nice sweep of monoculture and it expands. And Mike and I talked about this last year. It eventually will dissipate, but by then it will have moved on into the rest of your woods. So it's a 2-year cycle. Year 1, there's seed germination, and then there's a seedling, and then that's what's called a rosette. That is the form it lives in year 1. Those forms are under the snow right now, and they're still green, and they're still functioning, and the winter, the severe winter hasn't adversely affected them. And then in the spring, year 2, they'll start to bolt. That's when you want to get out there. You see that little hand pulling it up? You want to pull those things, and by flowering, you really want, because they're signaling, here I am, they got that white flower, pull it up, and then pretty soon in June, they're going to be forming seed pods, perhaps as many as 2,000 per plant, and you pick those when they're brittle and the seeds are just popping out. Okay, so much stuff seems to emanate from southern New England and then spreads west. But this is garlic mustard. The first occasion for my meeting Carolyn was at Hamlin, and we had determined, and Jill showed up, and we got to get rid of this stuff because it's going to produce seeds. So we started bagging it. Roger came, we did a session with the volunteers, and we collected 11 contractor bags full of seeding garlic mustard, which went to the Salisbury Sharon landfill, I believe, ultimately. Well, we burned it. Oh, we burned it. Even better. Thank you, Tim. Okay, on my own property, I don't remove it in that sense, but I have a big tarp. In May, I'm just filling it in and then covering it with the tarp. It just rots and decomposes there. I've never had an escaping seed or anything. And it always diminishes. It's rotting away. Okay, there it is under the snow. There it is in the fall. You can see rosettes of bittercress as well as mugwort. Here's a spread of it, and I think that Christian may have applied triclopyr to that was it 2 years ago? Because that's under control. Here is a section where the garlic mustard has been treated and is showing injury, decline. And, hey, so, in there is more than 1,000 plants, just as little seedlings. It's an indication of how prolific the seeding reproduction is of this plant. Okay, also allelopathic, same function. So that's why it's really a good idea to pick those plants so their decomposition and their root exudates are not altering the chemistry and inhibiting the germination of native plants. Canada thistle, good, we're turning the corner, is a different kind of herbaceous plant. It's not, it's also seed produced. Let's look at the cycle. Okay, there's that seed, it flies around, it can travel a great distance, so you want to mow those before their seed formation or treat them earlier in the season to prevent it. We never, by the way, treat anything when it's in blossom as a matter of course. This is also true of Connecticut DOT, Steve Geddes, District 4 arborist. So you got that seed, there's seed germination, there's the seedling, and then the rosette. So at that point you could spray those, and I tend to get in when these are young plants, and I spot spray them with triclopyr. This plant is also rhizominous. So if one plant establishes, it's going to put out root rhizomes and spring up a patch, even out of one plant over time. And Washini Park, my first project, the mowing was too late last year, and I did some spraying in the fall, but the synchronizing of the mowing of the meadow to prevent seed distribution is a key management tool. 5 minutes? Good. Okay. Thistle as well as mugwort. And mugwort is described in your book. There's mugwort, are also rhizominous. This is in May. Of all things, this is the parking lot meridian at the Berkshire Co-op Market. It's a monoculture of mugwort. It came in with fill that was contaminated, and those plants can produce up to 5,000 seeds per plant. Here's, I'm sorry to say, mugwort in one of Canaan's roadside gardens. Do not pick the flowers. You can't even see the flowers anymore. This is sort of my responsibility. I got to deal with this. Worse than that, Route 8 south of Winston in the Meridian. That's a 1/4 mile of mugwort. It is the most highly aggressive plant in our region, in my observation. And I spent a lot of time on Japanese knotweed management, including in this town here with presentations. And by the way, your first selectman, Casey Flanagan, came to our knotweed workshop for 12 departments of Public Works in Winston last summer, and he's on board. This is the Sharon Department of Public Works grounds, and that's one of their soil storage areas. It's a knotweed bomb that's exploding and producing seeds and would be contaminating whatever is adjacent to it. So this needs to be sprayed. I would suggest you're not going to go and climb around there and weed whack it and prevent seed formation. It's really got to be sprayed. Triclopyr is the proper spray. It has a better effect on rhizome translocation. So the town crew in their town trucks is not going around and working on a ditch or some kind of roadside project and planting mugwort around your town. I'm sorry to say, on Stonehouse Road leading up to Hamlin Preserve, there's mugwort. There's the seeds from last year. This was taken in late May, and there's the new growth coming out of that rhizomatous plant. Jill Drew and one other volunteer and I went around and we're flagging all those little mugwort plants. So I could, and here they are in front of the barn there, flag, flag. I'm going around with triclopyr. I'm spot sprayed. I mean spot. It's a selective herbicide. It's not going to kill the grass. There, a week or two later, you can see the injury, but the grass is unaffected. On one of Canaan's town roads, I treated this area, and I think I got pretty good kill. You got to monitor these things. Also on my street, same thing. Triclopyr sold as Garlon 3A or Triclopyr 3 is more expensive than glyphosate and in a sense more caustic, so you need to be very careful with your your personal protective equipment and so forth and so on. By the way, triclopyr can be also used in a buckthorn blaster, although triclopyr is more effective in the spring, glyphosate is more effective in the fall. So here's the map of Sharon knotweed. And I'm going to propose to Casey Flanagan, and maybe there's someone in here who might have the inspiration to do a roadside survey of all of the town roads of Sharon, map the location by taking a picture with your GPS iPhone settings turned on, and we can then channel that stuff to the HVA. The Housatonic Valley Association has done these maps for us for 6 towns in the wild and scenic Housatonic area, and maybe it's now time to think about, okay, where did we plant mugwort in the last 5 years? Let's go out there, and so we don't mow it at the wrong time and spread seeds down the road, control it with triclopyr would be my recommendation. That's the conclusion of my talk. We're going to do a transition to Mike. Carolyn is going to come up and talk to you about the volunteer squads, and thank you very much. And then I will, thank you.
As Tom has mentioned many times in his presentation, a lot of the work that we are able to do, and the reason why we're able to get it done is because of volunteers. And I would say that's true of all of the organizations.
With the Sharon Land Trust, we have both the chairs of both commissions that are involved today here. So if you're interested in getting more involved at the town level, Bethany's also here from the Sharon Audubon Center if you're interested in volunteering with them. But I highly encourage you. It's a great way to learn more hands-on about these topics. They do a lot of work around our invasive species management. Our volunteers also help us maintain our trails, help us with events, help us even with some office stuff. So there's plenty of roles if you're interested in getting more involved. With that, I'm also going to take a minute to just plug a few upcoming events that some of our organizations have coming up soon, including some events in the next week taking place at the Sharon Audubon Center on Thursday. In partnership with several of our partners hosting today's event, they're holding an event on light pollution and its effects on birds, wildlife, and human health.
It's gonna be at the Sharon Audubon Center. There's more information in the back of the room if you're interested in that. Next Saturday, they're having also a presentation on how sugarbush can benefit birds and other wildlife. Very cool, interesting topics coming up. More information in the back of the room. All right, now I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay, hey everyone. So thanks for braving the weather, and looks like we have more coming tomorrow. Maybe another foot. Yes. It's winter, it's New England. Get over it. So here we are. Amazing amount of people put this together. And the outreach, the reason why you're all here is because of the outreach from all of these organizations. And can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. So, I wanted to talk a little bit, my first couple slides are warning slides. Glyphosate in the right hands, doing the right thing is wonderful. However, we should know what we're dealing with. So, pretty much, Monsanto had scientists that were paid, and they wrote this document. It was all hidden. Monsanto had covered the tracks so that scientists were not affiliated with Monsanto. It's just been disproven. It was in the New York Times, January 5th, 2026. So basically, this is their landmark study that said that glyphosate is safe and doesn't cause cancer, and that's been totally disproven now. So it's up in the air whether glyphosate is toxic or not. So I just wanted to make sure that you have some awareness about what's going on. So this one here gets into some deep science. It's called the shikimate pathway, which is the ability of a plant to send minerals and nutrients through its body, if you will, and be able to make minerals and nutrients plant available. So we do not have a shikimate pathway being a mammal, but our gut is populated with billions and billions of organisms that do have a shikimate pathway. So if we eat anything that's been treated with Roundup, that gets poisoned. And one of the major things is these increases in allergies and diseases that originate in the gut, where 80% of our immune system is in our microbiome there. So, there's a lot of information to know so that you make the right choice. If you cover yourself up and you use it properly and you have just a minute amount like the buckthorn blaster puts out, good stuff. Use it indiscriminately or without warning, or realizing that there are other alternatives, which I'm going to talk about. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm trying to round you out. So there's the Rogers approach and Tom's approach, and then there's a different approach. So, villains in your backyard, practices, strategies for invasive plants at home and in your garden. So again, I just want to point out a few things here. Is there any such thing really as a bad plant? I think bittersweet's a bad one. I really do. That just changes the rules. That takes trees down, and then when the tree goes down, one thing Tom didn't mention is when the tree falls because of bittersweet invasion, it then crawls. It's allowed to crawl onto something else. Tom showed one transferring from one tree into another. I mean, that could be, as far as I'm concerned, that could be a bad plant. But plants are opportunists. They grow where they can. It's not a bad plant. It's really us. We brought them here. We gave them as Christmas gifts and beautiful wreaths, and people discarded them and not knowing what we were doing. And guess what we have? We have a real problem now. And it's really important to know, a little dose of humility is that we are the most invasive species on the planet by far. So just keep that in mind. So some theory about this whole idea about what is invasive and what we should be doing. I think in the big picture, they're here to stay. We can control them where we want to. However, there's downsides to that control and there's upsides to that control. With knowledge, time, and inputs, we can protect and enhance native ecosystems almost wherever we want. And the asterisk shows that plants are just a small part of an ecosystem. So think about all of the other things that live in an ecosystem. Are invasive plants a new paradigm? Questions to ask yourself. Are they here to stay? Why control them? How do we learn how to live with them? And where do we pick our battles? So that's what this presentation is pretty much about. So here we are in the arid part of the world, and that is a beautiful prairie structure called the Mudif that's built out of Phragmites. It's native there, and it's not a problem. So we talked a little bit about Canada thistle on the left-hand side. One we haven't talked about too much yet is black swallowwort, and it's new to this area. It's on East Street. I've seen some there. It's not on my property yet, but that's a really nasty one. It's a shrub and a vine together, and it is extremely deeply rooted. Where do you see that? Make sure that you do something about it. The best way the way that I've handled black swallowwort is to cut it repeatedly and then remove it with a trowel by teasing it out when it's young. Like, even that might even be just a little bit too old. It's very, very easy to tell. This picture doesn't show it, but some of the leaves are like purplish green, so they show it very well. And Canada thistle on the left is taprooted. Something like this, I would use a dandelion digger. So long handled thing with a fork on the end, and you just tease the soil. You minimize the disturbance wherever possible. Any disturbance in that soil will bring up other weed seeds. There might be Canada thistle seeds in there, but other weed seeds. So being as gentle as you can is really important. So we have a toolbox. What's in there? You know, we have a cultural toolbox. First of all, just don't plant invasives. It's amazing that they're still for sale. People like them. You know, the deer don't eat them. There's no insects eat the leaves, so people still buy them. Minimize any disturbance, like I just said. Off-site inputs, really important. Tom touched on the town with their different piles, but it's everywhere. I don't import anything on my property anymore. No mulch, no topsoil. I make my own compost. I make sure. Because weed seeds are everywhere, and they're going to be spread by stuff you bring from off-site. Habitat modification, you want to definitely make sure that you can, you know the ecosystem. So there are some plants that increase the soil pH, like barberry. Well, actually, their leaves dropping on the ground will raise the soil pH. So there's things you can do after removing barberry, like putting down a little bit of sulfur to counteract that higher pH to get the pH back to where it should be. Unless you're in a limey area, so that's why it's really important to know the ecosystem you're working in. And pruning to prevent seed production. So in the years when I had my landscape business, some clients wouldn't let me remove their invasives because they liked them so much. Like one is burning bush, you know, the really nice pinkish red flower leaf in the fall. So what we would do is in June when they flowered, we would prune them back really hard, take all the flowers off, and that way they couldn't go to seed. You still had to deal with some spreading. Euonymus isn't a big rhizomatous plant, but the clump itself can get bigger. So same thing with barberry. If clients buy the purple leaf barberry, we used to just prune them really hard when they flowered, and they wouldn't go to seed. So that's in the cultural department. The physical and mechanical is, of course, hand pulling, cutting and mowing, which we'll talk about, because cutting and mowing seems to be one of the most effective ways to get away from using chemicals. Girdling, which we'll talk about, flaming, flooding, using water to control invasives. Biological, this one's a little tricky. Introduce pathogens or insects. Many of those experiments have backfired and bit us in the butt. There is one right now that's being used for purple loosestrife, the Garicella beetle, and we were fortunate enough to be involved with the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station 15 years ago down at Beardsley Zoo in Bridgeport when we treated a patch of purple loosestrife that was taking over a wetland. And we treated it with this beetle, and we planted the native yellow flowering loosestrife right next to it. and they did not touch them, and they still haven't touched them. The neat thing about this Garocella beetle, I'll get into it a little bit later, is that it's a really good parent. It will not kill all the food source for its young. It'll leave 5 to 10% of the purple loosestrife alive, and just so enough to feed its young. And if the purple loosestrife starts to increase like it did this year, I noticed a lot more loosestrife, so will the beetle increase. So it's a nice balance so far, but that's tricky. And I talked about soil modification, and then chemical. That's in the very bottom of my toolbox. I do use them. I use organically accepted herbicides, which we'll talk about. So here's just a few natural control methods. So one is using a weed wrench. So that's a buckthorn, about 1.5 inches in diameter. The fulcrum here, this bar right here, is very solid steel. The jaw collapses and closes in the harder you pull back the handle. And I have not been able to break this or bend it. I've even ran it over with my tractor, and it's still just fine. You can yank them out of the ground that way. However, you're doing some soil disturbance, and look what's around it. Garlic mustard. So there's garlic mustard seeds in there too. So removing things, there's a cost. We mulched right after that by using local mulch. We did not bring anything in. Handling. So I'm going to drop a very prominent name, and it's because he wanted me to every time I showed any of the slides on his property. This is Paul Newman's land. He was one of our clients in Westport, and he loved the smell of the native grape, the wild grape that grew up into the trees. However, Bittersweet was using the native grape to get up into the trees. So we selectively removed by hand pulling the bittersweet vines on his property. He allowed me to experiment. He wanted me to, and he paid me to experiment, to find ways to take care of invasives without using chemicals. So when Newman's Own Organics, he was the driving force behind that. He was incredibly organic. On the left here, we have a large Norway maple that was on a land trust property in Old Saybrook. And you can see the opening in the background here was a meadow that was getting overtaken. All of the green things that you see here on the ground are baby Norway maples. So strongly allelopathic, as Tom mentioned, and dense, super dense shade. So we wanted to leave the tree as a snag for the wildlife. A dead standing tree is just as viable as a living tree is in certain situations. So what we did with the chainsaw, we went into the bark, into the cambium, into the heartwood, into the softwood, and then into the heartwood. When the chainsaw starts throwing out dark colored chips, you've gone in far enough. And we did 2 cuts. Now what happened was the tree tried to defoliate down here. So we just went and snapped them off. We had actually volunteers to do this. So that's a really good way to take care of invasive plants and still leave them for environmental reasons. And then on the right, we're going to talk about using propane with barberry. Now, is propane organic? Not really. Is it more or less injurious than chemicals? Not really. But the big plus to this is 87% control versus 93% control with a chemical. So that's my thing, is I try to stay away from synthetic chemicals and use any tool I can. Propane happens to be very, very close in efficacy when treating barberry with the right method. So here's another one, smothering. So this is a 6-acre meadow in Deep River, right on the Connecticut River. We did wildflower meadow in 2 different 3-acre sections. So that is used silage tarps. So farmers cover their silage, and we get them for free. And they're nylon woven through there, so they're really strong. And the sandbags. And we just cover, first of all, what we did was we cut very low, called scalp mowing, and then we vacuumed up all that debris, and we tried to get as much bare soil as we could. And then we put the smother on top,
And instead of using mulch, which you have to remove later, we use sandbags to hold down the plastic. So scalp mowing, and this is just for grass. You can probably control grass in 1 year. If difficult weeds, 2+ years. And some weeds, like black swallowwort came up in here, we had to actually hand remove it after 2 years. So this is not really the best way to do it all the time, depending on the weeds you have, especially if you have woody weeds. After you mow them, they make very sharp projectiles, which will puncture the plastic. And wherever there's a little bit of sunlight, guess what will grow? So you have to be careful. We actually did a job for a land trust where we brought in a crimper, which is we mowed it, and then we brought in a crimper, which then laid all of the stems down, and then we covered it in plastic. Plant to control the germinated weed seeds after removal, because when you remove this, you're going to have a beautiful seed bank, and without any competition. And pretty much the goodies aren't going to come back first. It's going to be the annual weeds first. So even though you've smothered it and solarized it, you're still going to have to do some treatment after you're done with that. So this is before, and this is the same spot after. So that's my client, and that's the Connecticut River. And what we were concerned about was runoff. So with plastic, water runs right off. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't create so much velocity that we were going to put silt and pollutants into the pond. So we had buffer strips that we planted with, well, we didn't actually plant, we used sterilized straw bales that were inoculated with mushrooms and turkey tail mushroom, so Trametes versicolor. And they grew hypha all throughout these, they grew mycelium, and the smaller roots of the mycelium are called hypha. And they sucked up all of the minerals and nutrients that came off of that water that was sheeting down. So this is what you can do when you have something that is mostly lawn, and a couple years later, without any chemicals, you can get something like this. So time to target mowing, this is probably one of my preferred methods. It buys time, and the timing is super, super important, and we'll talk about that. Cutting weeds at ground level minimizes the soil disturbance. You do not want to go into the soil. At all costs, we minimize disturbance because you're going to bring up weed seeds. Mowing or cut often, leaving desirable vegetation to shade out the weeds. So often in meadows like on the right-hand side there, that is red clover that showed up in year 2 of a seeded meadow. There was no red clover there when we started. There was a lot of Japanese, not stiltgrass, there was reed canary grass, a lot of that in here, which we took care of with organic herbicide and machinery. And the red clover just showed up, and it came in so thick in patches that it started to inhibit the beneficial or the seeds that we planted in there from coming up. So what we did was we scalp mowed around those red clover patches 3 times in one season. The next season, they were weakened enough to where the perennial crop could come in and overtake the clover. So mow often, leave desirable vegetation, allows desirable vegetation to reestablish and increase in vigor. So weeds will take the sunlight and the nutrients and the water. And if you limit those with this selective mowing, it results in control, but not eradication. So what we were using for the herbicide in this picture is the beneficial plants that we planted in there. We wanted to make sure that we put enough seeds. This gets into meadow making, but you want to have at least 140 seeds per square foot when you seed a meadow, at least, and even more on a slope. And what we tried to do was to control, knock back the invasive plant enough to weaken it to where the other plants could then grow up and overtake it. So there was no herbicide used here. We didn't need it. So time mowing will weaken the weeds. It prevents seed production and creates these really nice revegetation possibilities. So these are areas that had weeds in them, and you see little blue stem and a bunch of boneset and things like that in here, all beneficial. Here's some coreopsis. There's a little lupin starting there. So what we do after that is we take, there we go. We take some of the cuttings from the meadow that has all the stems and seeds. 5 minutes, okay. And we shake those over those areas, and then we lay the mulch down. So in the areas where the meadow had no weed problems, we harvested that material, and then we walked through the meadow and shook out the seeds and then laid the debris over the top as a mulch. So flooding, using water. So there's a long story, I can't get into it, but there's a private road right here, and up on top of the hill, they built 4 new homes. When they dug the foundations, they severed springs, so the springs, instead of running underground, ran over the top. My client was at the bottom of the hill. I'm standing on their swimming pool patio, and that was a mosquito breeding area. All the water ran downhill into their low spot. Years ago, we knew it was wet, so we planted these river birches, which are doing really well. But that's just too much water. So we flagged out an area, as you could see, and then we flooded it for 5 weeks. We got permission from the town to use the fire hydrant. We flooded it for 5 weeks, and then we drowned the vegetation, which leaves a nice mulch. Again, minimal disturbance as much as we can. Went in and planted the woody plants and the larger plants first, and then went in and planted plugs. There's the foreman. Always have to have a foreman on the job. And that's what it looked like a year later. So that's that standing water that no longer breeds mosquitoes and is, I think, a beautiful thing to look at. It's a snapshot in time. Those red flowers that you see are cardinal flower. They don't come back well from plants. You really need to disturb the soil a little bit and they'll come back. But that's one of the tricks there. And then this is Paul Newman's place again. He had a lot of gill over the ground. There's all kinds of names for it. And he wanted us to learn how to control it without chemicals. So we did a burning here, and it worked out really well. We then seeded with a really aggressive annual rye, perennial rye fescue mix. So the annual rye and the perennial rye grow really quickly and took over a lot of the real estate where this plant was flourishing. Some things to know about fire: get training, obtain permits, you're going to need them. Never burn alone, have extinguishing materials readily available. This is all no-brainer, but it needs to be said. So direct burning with Japanese barberry. So the initial healthy plant we start with, we kill above ground tissue with either prescribed fire or mechanically. So I like to mow them with a weed whacker with a brush blade on it. The root reserves then will shoot up a new little green spot, and then you go back with the heat or with an herbicide. So about 14 seconds directed at the base of the plant is about what it took to kill 87% of the barberry versus 93% with Roundup, or triclopyr, I think it was. So the big thing about barberry that a lot of people don't know is that they harbor ticks, and they harbor the white-footed mouse that loves to live in those multi-stemmed clumps that are full of prickers. So the foxes and the hawks can't get to them, so they know that's where they want to hang out. And inch for inch of skin area, white-footed mouse is the #1 vector for Lyme disease ticks, not deer. So just look at the control just by getting rid of the barberry. Japanese stiltgrass, we'll talk really quickly about this. That's what it looks like. It's got a really shiny midrib. It's the Achilles heel of this plant is it's an annual. It flowers in August, produces seed in September through November. The seeds last 7, now they're saying 10 years in the soil. So, and it can produce seed at 1/2 inch tall. So if you mow it too early, it's going to still grow seed. Hand pulling is one way to do it when seeds of previous seasons cannot establish. So in other words, if you hand pull it, later in the season, then this disturbance you create that releases the weed seed, it's an annual. It can't go to flower. It doesn't have enough time. The winter comes and kills it. So really timing is very important. Prescribed burning, this stuff melts with propane. It's amazing how easy it is to control. Mowing late summer during flower stage, but before seed development. It's super important. Close to the ground, but do not disturb. Or you can use an organic burn down herbicide applied late in summer. Repeat control measures until seed is exhausted. And I'll tell you, this is two different methods of doing it. One was by hand. The one thing about using these tools is you get really hot right here. So we decided to purchase one of these, which worked a lot better. And that was the area that we treated. And on the right, this stilt grass is insidious. You never know when you have control. So I took very, very shallow soil samples. I moistened them. I put them in these things that you buy, lettuce or whatever at the market, closed them down, put them in the sun, and let them germinate. If Japanese stilt grass came back, we did not seed until we went back and did another control. This took 4 burns. And what we did is we burned the plant and the soil surface. The soil surface is where the weed seeds are. So we sterilized the top 1/4 inch, so to speak, with fire. And this is 2 years after we burned it. Managing sunlight, I'm probably out of time. I'm going to go really quick. So as you noticed, invasives like the edge. They love to grow up trees along the edge. They have a lot of sunlight along the edge. Once they're removed, use native plants. They cast a lot of shade and a lot of competition. Here's pruning to cut off the flowers of different plants. Remove the flowers before the seed development, please. There's the biological control of purple loosestrife with the Garicella beetle in the middle. And this is what the damage looks like. So if you see this, do not treat your loosestrife, purple loosestrife. Chickens, really good. I mean, look at this. Move that out of the way over here, and then over here and over here. And the neat thing about this is it eats weed seed, plants, insects, and puts it all out the back end as fertilizer. Can't beat that with a stick, as they say. The last thing I want to talk about is there are organic herbicides. This one is a fatty acid of potassium salt, and it's OMRI listed, which means it has Organic Materials Review Institute has taken it off the shelf and tested it, and everything in it is okay to use for organic agriculture. So those are the one herbicides that I'll use. This is on a large area. This is Salisbury School. Did a 6-acre meadow there. And this is using it in small quantities to take care of knotweed. Notice the comb ring right there. You go just below the comb ring and actually inject the stem. And you do this when the flowers are beginning to fade and before it goes to seed. That's when it's translocating all its symplast tissue or its goodies up in the upper part of the plant, gets stored in that root, and you fake it out and it'll take the organic herbicide with it. And it's a 2-year process with this. And I'm done. So this is, thank you. So I just want to make one point that the earth is one big giant miracle. We're part of that. Everything we do is going to have a positive or negative effect on the land in our care. And that is 2014, the North Pole during a full lunar eclipse. And I was there to take that picture, and that's about as high as the sun got the whole time. It was really a miracle. Thank you.
If folks have questions for both Mike and Tom, please, go ahead.
Tom, you have to get really close. You have to talk into this, so you're going to have to.
Phragmites. I haven't found the Achilles heel of Phragmites. What has been done by large governmental agencies is massive spraying. For me, what I like to see is a mowing first. So go in and mow it any way you can. Let it refoliate. Now you're spraying this much vegetation instead of 7 or 8 feet high. So that's one thing. Synthetic herbicides are probably the right move there. However, you're spraying mostly in wetlands. So there's a very specific herbicide you can use that's supposedly, but it's a Monsanto product. And we know that what they said is not so much true anymore. So,
One of the things I had heard was that there's a guy over in Pine Plains, a farmer, who's using water buffalo. He's literally putting water buffalo into the field with a big electric fence, and they just eat it.
okay, so most ruminants will eat the plant right down to the ground, but they will not pull the roots out. So that's not a one and done. That's something you have to constantly do. Water buffalo in a wetland, I would bet you could not get a permit in Sharon. Right? Right?
Yeah, I can respond to a little bit of that. Phragmites, I had an experience with that before I got involved in invasive plants because it was intruding upon a limestone quarry on the property. And during the winter, I bought a 40 by 50 foot black plastic tarp. I put rocks in the corners. I put it out over the ice. I tied in rocks into the corners. And the ice melted, it dropped down. I left it there for 3 years. And I eliminated the Phragmites. Another methodology is, if it's a small patch, cut the frag in below a nodule, and with an eyedropper, concentrate of glyphosate. The same way you would be applying this material here, but with an eyedropper. I had a little outbreak maybe 20 years later, and that's what I did, and it got resolved. But it was a small patch. The patches, hey, the Hamlin Marsh, which is just south of the Hamlin Grove in the fields, is, 40 acres of Phragmites. I think that's beyond management. So early detection and rapid response would be the best strategy. Other than
Yeah, Phragmite is probably one of the toughest ones.
Where did it come from? How did it get
It's
here?
native to China. Yep. And it's all throughout the Middle East and the Far East. And like I said, that prayer motif was made with Phragmites, where it's native, and also in Iran and Iraq. Before all these craziness and all these wars, they used it for their black water treatment. So it has a lot of really good filtering root system. And red-winged blackbirds are one of the few native things that actually like it. So it extirpates almost everything else, though. That is a tough one. I have no answer. Yes, Mike?
Do you guys have any current information on new biological controls for any of these plants you're talking about?
In the pipeline, there's an insect for knotweed. They've been testing a lot of things for Phragmites. Nothing that looks promising. Probably in another year or two, we will have a release of an insect. I'm not sure if it's a beetle or what it is actually for knotweed. So, but it's going to be released on very small plots and very controlled, see how that works, and then maybe in, 5-10 years. The political climate has a lot to do with how quick this stuff is going to come around. So, we'll see what happens. But yeah, from your lips to God's ears, right?
Could be.
I would add on the knotweed, and Aphelera isdori is the insect, and even University of Massachusetts has a release program where they're testing it in the Pioneer Valley, and we tried to draw them down into Houstonic as a wild and scenic test case. That hasn't happened. It's very actively being managed in the Northwest, Oregon in particular, and there's volumes of literature on it. Part of the problem is, will it overwinter? And shall we say, several years ago I had high hopes for it. Right now it's unresolved.
And with a winter like this, who knows? One good thing about this winter, though, is the woolly adelgid for hemlocks has really crashed, 100% mortality. So it says, yeah. However, they'll blow in from somewhere else, you know. It's just, so this is knotweed here, controlling knotweed with a JK injection tool, which looks like a pistol. One thing you can't see in the top of the picture, there is a canister with herbicide that gets pressurized. And you can set the trigger to do 1 milliliter or 3 milliliters. Put a blue dye in. The really ingenious thing about this is the needle, like all needles, is really pointy at one end, but the hole where the material comes out is about halfway through. So you push the needle in all the way and then you pull it out a little. And what that does is it leaves a little room for burping so that the air that's in there gets displaced when you squeeze the trigger. If you don't do that, the air will mix with the, it will not allow as much herbicide into the plant. So that's the trick to that. It takes 2 years. I do it in the fall, September, when the flowers are starting to look ugly. They start to melt away and it's before seed. That's when the plant is translocating all of its goodies down into that knotweed, into that root. And it takes the herbicide down. It takes 2 years to do it. Yes?
So much of the time is in the season when there are ticks, also in all this foliage. How are you protecting yourselves from being swarmed by
ticks?
ticks? Yeah.
I either use, hey, Roger is adamant about tucking in the socks. Normally at Hamlin, we offer DEET. We spray it on our clothing, not on our skin. I go through several canisters of that in a year. And then, of course, you do a check afterwards. We recommend long pants, long sleeves, and light colored, not black jeans.
So pants this color, white socks tucked in, your pants tucked in, and constant vigilance.
Yeah.
Always
Do you have
looking-
an alternative to DEET?
And having.
Yeah, there is. It's called Nature Pal, and Consumer Reports gave it high rating. I bought 3 cans of that. So we normally offer that as well as Hamlin as an option.
What's it called? What's it called?
Nature Pal.
PEL. Yeah, Nature Pal. So the other one is permethrin that people use, and you can actually buy clothes that are treated with permethrin. However, it's systemic through our skin, and it absorbs in your fatty tissues and can get built up into a toxic level for some people that are susceptible. So just be careful. I'm the yin and yang. He's yin, I'm yang.
Quick question.
Could you talk more about the burns that you do? Is it just spot burning barberry, or are you doing areas?
Just spot burning barberry after they're cut.
Uh-huh.
So you go in about June, when the leaves are full size, so that means a lot of the energy has been taken out of the root that's been stored, and you cut it right down to the ground, but not into the ground, and then you let it resprout, and usually in July, August, you come back and you burn it again, 14 seconds at the base. There's a lot of sulfur in barberry, so it glows a beautiful color when you burn it. It doesn't actually flame, but it's really good to either wet down the vegetation around it or the leaf litter, or rake it away, which I don't like doing because that's a disturbance. You can then move it back afterward, but you're still stirring things up. So I usually have a backpack that would normally be used for spraying an herbicide. I just put water in it and soak the area immediately around the barberry and then burn.
And is
I
anybody
have a-
doing
I
big
have a
burns
variation.
in our
Sorry.
region?
Say
Is
again?
anybody doing bigger burns in our region? Because I have friends out in Iowa who've restored an
Yeah.
entire oak savanna.
Talk to the
that way,
fire
and they do
department.
their front yard.
I've tried to get permits. I have meadows all over here that I'd love to burn,
Okay,
and I just can't get a permit.
yeah.
And I understand.
I use that same two-phase method that was developed by Jeff Ward of the Connecticut Ag Experimental Station, but I do it somewhat differently. But in 1 year, I went through 50 acres of woods I owned in Canaan, and I brush bladed every barberry plant, and I let it resprout just like Mike. And then later that following, and I did it in the fall, in the winter. You could do it right that, and, as long as there's no snow. In the dormant period, a good time to hit it. And then I applied 1% glyphosate to what was a 6-inch target rather than a 36-inch target. And 1% is tested by TNC and others for certain plants where it is as effective just essentially as 2%. So being judicious in the application of herbicides is part of what we do at Hamlin, et cetera. Where we can use 1%, we use 1%. I have eliminated, I'm making progress. I've eliminated buckthorn in large part. I have, in cross-country skiing in my woods a couple weeks ago, I spotted one barberry plant. I think it's the only one I've missed. So I basically eliminated it from my entire acreage.
Propane or Roundup or hand removal or repeated cutting will take care of barberry.
Well, is there a certain temperature for the propane that you want to reach when you're burning?
That's a great question. So there are small burners and there's 500,000 BTU. The 500,000 BTU is the one you want. It has a trigger on the handle that you can, it'll leave a flame going, and when you hit the trigger, it'll sound like a jet taking off. That's the one that's most effective. There's a 200 and a 300,000 BTU. The 500,000 called the Red Dragon or something, I think it's called, is the one that you can buy. Try and get the snorkel boom. So a lot of them are straight like that. I showed you the shaft is straight where the fire comes out at the end. There are better ones that come out like this and then they're gooseneck. So you can hold it away from you, but the flame is still going straight down, which is much more effective than glancing the weed with the flame. And your legs won't get burned.
Time for one or two more questions. Go ahead.
Could you go over the sequencing and mudboard again?
So the injection,
No, just how you treat it and when you treat it.
so I treat it, well, first of all, I mow it twice during the season.
At what point do you mow?
So it depends on the weather and all of that, but usually in late May, when it's still coming up and still fleshy, I mow it in late May or June, and then about 3 or 4 weeks later, depending on how much vegetation comes back, and mow it again, so you're insulting it twice. So it's taken a lot of energy out of its root system to refoliate. And now you have a weakened plant and a much smaller plant to treat. And then the bottom comb, the comb ring, there's a certain name for it, but I can't remember what it is. You inject just under that with the JK injection tool, and I used Final Sand. And it's an organic herbicide. Stick it into the stem, back it out just a little, and then squirt until you see the blue dye come out. And that way you know you've got enough. Next year, some will come back all spindly and misshapen. Do the same thing, mow them twice, and then inject them again. Say again?
Labor intensive.
It is labor intensive, yeah. But not only it's a formidable foe, you know, and that's its Achilles heel, is that the only time...
Mugwort.
Oh, mugwort.
Mugwort.
Oh, I thought... I didn't hear it, I'm sorry. Mugwort, I'm going to pass that one on to you. Mugwort, as far as I'm concerned, is one of those plants that I haven't found the Achilles heel for either.
Yeah, it's the rhizomatous plant and the ant combined with the seed production. You don't want to mess with it. I think you can, if you have a small patch, 6 by 6 feet, you want to cover it with, if you want to do covering or smothering, so-called, you could cover that. But if it's on a roadside, you can't maintain a plastic patch on the side of a road. And often these things seem to be on roadsides, or they're coming out of contaminated fill in a garden, for example. I spotted one at Lions Rock, had a wedding there coming right out of the garden. It's obviously contaminated fill. That one plant you probably could hand pick, early detection, because it has an established rhizomatous structure. But by the time you're up to a 3-foot patch, well, you could probably tarp that and cover it and monitor it. You would cut it down first and then cover it. But both glyphosate and triclopyr are used on mugwort. I think triclopyr is more effective. There are other formulations. One is called chloropyrrolid, but it's a more intense chemistry. I tend to stay with the simpler formulations that are not cocktails.
So the whole thing about, there's this other material, it's a synthetic, it's called Stinger. And it only controls 3 different species. So you can spray it over the top of lots of other flowers and any grasses. However, it's tricky to use. It's a little bit more toxic, it's more expensive, and there's a life cycle time when you have to use when it works best. I volunteered on a park in Windsor, Connecticut, where it had to all be organic, and it was almost all mugwort. So what we did there was we weed whacked every single other week. Every 2 weeks we weed whacked with volunteers. Nobody got paid, including me. And then we plugged in very aggressive plants. We planted plug plants. Canada anemone was one of them. Anything in the mint family, Pycnanthemum, Monarda, and then grasses. We plugged them in really thickly, like 8 to 10 inches apart.
Some of those questions. Canada thistle, another rhizomatous plant. If you have questions about that, take a look at this. Yeah, consider it public enemy #1 at this point. It's insidious, and I imagine it will own most of Connecticut DOT's roadside real estate. Within 10 years, it's going to be a continuous border of mugwort, because they do a spring mowing and a fall mowing, and usually the fall mowing is after seeding.
So they're actually planting it.
They're actually liberating the seeds, and then a big diesel truck goes by and the vacuum behind it sucks those seeds down the road, and that's why you see an extended linear park.
Amongst all the different possibilities for herbicides and so forth, is sort of industrial grade concentrated vinegar the thing, or is that really not?
I have lots of experience with vinegar, and I'll tell you I don't use it anymore. I use 30% and 40% vinegar. Both of them were on me listed. They were organic. The downside to it is they vaporize. If you've ever had brandy and a brandy sniffer, and you swirl it around and smell it, that's basically what's happening. Is it's off-gassing. Also, it could cause permanent blindness if you splash it in your eyes. Plus, it needs to be mixed. We mixed it with citrus oil, salt flour, so a special formulation of salt that's been pulverized to a flour, and dish liquid to emulsify the citrus oil with vinegar. They didn't play nice with each other. If you added enough surfactant in dish liquid, you could get it in solution. What we found is after we could not clean the sprayers fast enough. It would just attack the acid in there, would just attack all of the gaskets and everything. So we got the heck away from vinegar.
Can I make one last point? There's 150 feet back there. Pull off 10 feet. Don't go into the woods without this in your pocket. You can leave it in your pocket even through the laundry cycle. Just leave it in your pocket. That's really your initial approach to your land. Since this is about your backyard, you want to be having a bunch of these out there decorating your landscape, so you are reminded there's work to be done.
So with that, I think that's a great. Thank you both, Mike and Tom. Thank you for sharing your time, your experience, and all of your insight with us. I'd also like to thank our partners one more time, the Sharon Energy and Environment Commission, the Salisbury Association Land Trust, the Sharon Conservation Commission, and the Sharon Audubon Center. Our collective collaboration is really what makes this series possible. And these kind of partnerships allow us to bring together just a wide breadth of knowledge, resources, and perspectives. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, just a reminder, our final workshop in the series, Heroes in Your Backyard, Choosing Planting and Supporting Native Plants for Healthier Landscapes, will take place on Saturday, March 28th. It's important to know that we are going to change the start time to that program. It was originally plugged as a 10 a.m. start. We're going to move it to 9:30. There are a lot of events going on in our communities that day, and we just want to accommodate people's
No
schedules
kings.
so that they can participate in all of the events. So I'll send an email notification about that. It's important to know a lot of the resources that have been shared and the recordings for last month's presentation and today's presentation will be located on the Sharon Land Trust website. We have a page that is Native and Invasive Plants webpage. I'm also going to send an email out to everybody who attended with a link directly to that in case you want to share the recordings, or if you missed the first presentation or can't make it to the next one, they'll all be hosted on that webpage. And so thank you to Jonathan Doster for recording all of these for us.